Welcome, everyone. We're going to get started in just a moment. In the meantime, if you want to share where you're calling in from, that's always fun to see. Okay, well, I know we have a very full program today, so I don't want to take any more of that time. So I'm just going to jump in and do a brief intro, and then we'll get started with the conversation. So first off, welcome to Past and Present with Allison Gilbert, Vicki J, and Tyler Fetter. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. My apologies if not. My name is Dara Cosberg. I'm the program director at Reimagine. We're a nonprofit organization that sparks community experiences like this one that empower individuals, families, and communities to really face the hardest parts of our existence, like serious illness and death, while inspiring people to celebrate life and one another. And before we get started, I just have a few things to share. So first off, I'd like to take a moment and thank Domani for Grief for their incredible support of this series. They are our sponsor. And I'd also just to highlight a few things for on Zoom, which I'm sure many of you are very familiar with. We're going to keep our microphones off, but we really do encourage you to write questions and comments into the chat, and we will have a Q&A later on in the program. If the chat is bothering you, you can always click it and do the little X in the corner. Also, which is not in the slide, but if you click CC on the bottom, you can enable live transcription. And so with that, I want to just do a brief introduction for Allison, who is an Emmy Award-winning journalist and really one of the most thought-provoking and influential writers on grief and resilience. She's the author of numerous books, including Past and Present, Keeping Memories of Loved Ones Alive. And her work exposes the secret and essential factor for harnessing loss to drive happiness and rebound from adversity. She serves on the board of directors for the National Alliance for Grieving Children and the advisory board for the tragedy. No, I'm sorry. Allison, can you fill in where?
Yes, of course.
I'm sorry, the other page is missing.
It's called TAPS, the Tragedy Assistance Program for Survivors.
Thank you. Okay, and with that, I'm going to pass it off to Allison.
Well, welcome everybody, and thank you so much, Dara, and the entire Reimagine team. Thank you too for Domani for Grief for being really the kind of the engine behind this conversation event series. I am so glad that you are back with us today. And if you're joining us for the first time, we host these conversations the last Thursday of every month. And so if you want to see our past conversations, please go to the Domani for Grief website. You can find a link to our past conversations there. We are also recording this, so if you need to jump off because you're taking care of children at home, maybe you're taking a lunch break or a morning break, depending on where you are in the world, don't worry, low stress. If you are not here live, you can catch up with the conversation later. That's no problem whatsoever. In terms of housekeeping, I am really, really good with time. I will honor the time you are giving us today. We will be done out by 2 o'clock Eastern time, 11 o'clock, of course, Pacific. So you can count on that. You will not miss anything if you need to do something right at the end of our call today. Last piece of logistics before we jump in. Christina, could you raise your hand? Christina is going to be going through the chat to look for your questions. If something that Vicki J says stirs something in you, please write it down in the chat. If it makes you have a new question that comes to you, please put it down in the chat. If Tyler says something that you agree with, that resonates with you, please put it in the chat. And what Christina will do is go through the chat, make sure we are referring to your questions in the chat when we do have time for Q&A. And so I welcome you to do that. And by the way, I am amazed by how many people are joining us from all over the country today and internationally. I saw some folks from the UK. I see Minnesota. I see San Diego. Hello, Georgia and Atlanta. I mean, I see lots of different states and countries represented, Canada, Montreal. Thank you guys for being here. Today's conversation is very near to my heart for multiple reasons. I really wanted to tackle children's grief, but not only when we think of children, the youngest of kids. I also want to talk about how we can support older children, the young adults in our lives, perhaps the kids who are closest to us who may be in college or perhaps joining the workforce for the first time. It's during that tender time when we know that new grief is challenging and old grief can really pop up and make life potentially more complicated. So I feel like by having Tyler here today, and we'll talk about her new and outstanding book that I cannot wait to share with you guys, and to have Vicki J here as the CEO of the National Alliance for Grieving Children, we are in very good and safe hands, that the information that you will learn today can be trusted, and that we can express ourselves in perhaps a vulnerable way and get the answers to some of our questions that may be making us feel a little bit uneasy right now. So I want to start, if you don't mind, with somewhere kind of odd in a discussion perhaps about grief. And it's really something that we have not discussed in the past and present conversation series before at all. And it has to do with guilt, and guilt in numerous and unexpected ways. And what Tyler has done in your book, which I love and we're going to get into right now, is that Tyler lost her mom while she was in college. You were a sophomore, and you can correct me where I go wrong, Tyler, but you were a sophomore in college. And your new book, you're an artist, you're an amazing artist, and you wrote a graphic memoir called, everyone get their pens, Dancing at the Pity Party, which, by the way, best title of a book ever. It really lets you know that there's going to be humor attached to a wrenching experience. And in your book, Dancing at the Pity Party, Tyler, you talk about guilt in 3 unexpected ways. And Christina, you're going to help me by showing some of these images. The first one, in terms of guilt, is that sometimes guilt can show up in our lives when we're actually feeling happy, that somehow we don't feel like we have ownership of joy after a loved one dies. This may be the most obvious way that the conversation about guilt shows up. So I want to show everyone, take in this image, and then Tyler, can you walk us through where you were in your life when your mom died and how this feeling of guilt and happiness, that commingling, how that showed up for you?
Sure. Hi, everyone. So my mom died the spring break of my sophomore year of college. She got sick the summer before the school year started, so it was a really quick decline. And I felt kind of like a kid when it happened. I wasn't super prepared for college psychologically. I would have preferred being like in elementary school and going home for an after school snack every day. I like wasn't ready for the world. So it was a huge shock to the system when my mom died.
And
And
yeah, I was just going to say, when you talk about that time of life, right, when college is supposed to be that place of incredible, at least what you see in the movies, of fun all the time, and then you felt maybe guilty, maybe going back into that life of joy. How did that show up for you?
yeah, well, it was tough. My mom got sick over the summer and I had to go back to school. So even before she died, there was this weird feeling. I was in a different state and having fun with my friends and laughing and being somewhat social. And the whole time, like, just knowing that my mom was getting worse and worse was hard to reckon with. And then after she died, I took a lot of time off, but then I went back to school and like, got back into being in college and hanging out with my friends. And like, my mom died March 21st. My birthday is April 19th. So I was back at school celebrating my birthday at a bowling alley with my friends. And it was weird to think that like I'm laughing and I'm eating cake and like my mom is gone, and I'm moving forward kind of um, without her. And
I
yeah,
think that part of guilt, Tyler, hits home for so many of us. And there's two other components of your guilt story that shows up in your book, Dancing at the Pity Party, which I found to be illuminating because they are not, at least to me, and maybe Vicki J, when we bring her in, will disagree, but they weren't as obvious to me. One of them is about the guilt of remaining sad, that somehow there is a timed bound nature to this experience and that you felt guilty with your prolonged grief experience. Can you help us understand what you mean by this part of guilt?
yeah, this one I think is even harder for me than the previous one we talked about. My mom was big on independence, and she had sort of a sheltered childhood, and she really wanted me to go out and explore the world and be more independent than she was. And for me, like the way that grief shows up is this like homesick feeling that I get. Like I feel like I'm at a sleepover and I want to go home and see my mom. Um, Even now, my mom died in 2009, and I still get this feeling sometimes. And it can feel like almost embarrassing. Like I'm an adult, like, my mom wouldn't be mothering me in that kind of way if she were alive now, but I still had this longing for her, um, and I wouldn't want her to be disappointed by um, me having to take some time and miss her, even
I
now.
think a lot of folks who are listening to what you're saying can relate to it. I think it's one of those emotions. Our relationship with guilt has many forms. And so I feel like you're really illuminating a point of conversation that not only can we perhaps better recognize, but there are a lot of folks who are on this call who are in a position of being the helpers, right? Being the helpers who are maybe members of the National Alliance for Grieving Children. Those organizations, those professionals are on the front lines of helping children cope with loss. And so this is just another facet of guilt that maybe will help those further conversations. And there's one more, and then of course I'm pivoting to Vicki to get her perspective, but there's one more part of guilt that I really wanted to delve into, which is this beautiful illustration that you put into your book, which is about how it shows up in sibling relationships, that you had more time with your mom than your siblings. And to me, that was also quite eye-opening. And so can you talk about this particular form of guilt?
Yeah. So in a family with 3 girls. My sister Cody is 2 years younger than me, and my sister Spencer is 4 years younger. So my mom died when they were both in high school. It was actually the night before Cody's 18th birthday. And Spencer was 15. Like, I was 19, almost 20, and it's obviously hard at any age. We all know that. But it is just hard for me to reckon with. It's like I miss my mom so much, and I feel like I was dealt this horrible hand and I was so unlucky. And here I am having more memories and good times with my mom than either of my sisters did. My mom got to help me move into college, and that didn't happen for either of my sisters. And I find myself like apologizing to them about it every now and then, even now. And they're like, shut up, it's fine. Like, they don't hold resentment against me for it. We're all very close. And like, you can't help when you were born.
So Tyler, thank you for, well, first of all, your book, really, I could not put it down. It resonated so much with me, even the parts that I didn't experience. So part of your guilt exposure, right? Your ability to talk about that to me was eye-opening. And so I want to pivot to Vicki J, who can maybe give us that umbrella point of view. Vicki, you are at the head. You run the National Alliance for Grieving Children. It is a fantastic, robust organization that I am proud to be on the board and watch you do your thing and watch all the staff do its thing to help grieving children who are the youngest to young adults wrestle with these complicated issues. And I'm wondering, from your vantage point, what part of this conversation with guilt have you seen, have you heard? What can parents do to support their children who are younger and then older, as Tyler was in college, through some of these complicated and thorny emotions?
Thank you, Allison. And actually, I don't run the NAGC, it runs me. It keeps us all busy and hopping, because unfortunately there is more grief that is experienced in our world than should be. I just want to start by thanking Tyler, because the healthy attitudes you have towards sharing what is inside of you and your heart and your soul is such a gift to the kids. When they see an adult who's struggling with things that they identify with, then all of a sudden, it just comes down a notch or two and becomes, okay, I can do this too, kind of attitude. Guilt is obviously a very prevalent part of grief and loss. There's survivor's guilt and all levels of guilt. One of the things I wanted to kind of suggest, we always work, try to equip parents and caregivers and supporting adults to help kids. And some of the conversation that we can have as a child grows up actually plays into the difficult things like Tyler experienced. So for instance, if you teach double dip feelings, and a young child is very nervous about going to school, but very excited about going to school, all of a sudden that's a two-sided kind of a differing opinion. Well, some of the feelings you expressed, Tyler, were very much that. You missed her, but is it okay for me to be happy too? Can I have joy in my life, or do I have to stay sad? And if we start that skill, building that skill long before there's a loss, and then bring it into the discussions around loss, it really gives kids permission to say, it's okay. So we always tell our parents and our caregivers that, ask the kids the double dip question. What are you excited about? What are you nervous about? What are you worried about? What are you looking forward to? So to get them in the habit of looking at two sides of the coin, which is exactly what you were doing. You were saying, I'm really sad, but is it okay for me to be happy too? And so just, permission is such a tool with our kids, with all of us. Just giving ourselves permission and each other permission. The other side is just putting the topic on the table. People don't realize how hard it is to talk and how hard it is on those inside emotions. And so the fact that you said through your drawings and your cartoons, you've given tools for others to talk about it. Anytime you can have that, I identify, and I saw it on the chat multiple times already today. Me too. That's how I felt. That resonates with me. Me. So the more talking we can do about it, and especially guilt. Guilt is one of those things that's a little bit harder to talk about because it sometimes plays into our cultures and our religious and faith backgrounds. So whatever we're, taught through our kind of values becomes a part of our grief process. And so the kids will often talk about, their church beliefs or their family beliefs or the culture beliefs as it relates to guilt. And it's just real important that we have somebody who can be the sounding board and help us kind of work through that. Somebody who has the same belief system, the same culture, and that we give kids and ourselves permission to ask those questions. Does that make sense, Tyler?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
I
Okay.
love this. You guys, I'm floored already, and I'm so thrilled to have this dynamic duo of Tyler and Vicki helping us with this next few questions. Before I go into my next question for Tyler, then going back to Vicki for some of her take, I want to remind people where you can get more information about Vicki J and her work and NAGC in general. So on Facebook, it's NAGC News. On Twitter, it's NAGC News as well. And on Instagram, it's Children Grieve. For Tyler, to see more of her amazing work. And by the way, Tyler, you have another book coming out on June 1st for preschoolers, and it's about self-image and bodies. And it just I'm like your new fan, Tyler. I'm just gonna keep doing events with you all the time. But if you want to get in touch with Tyler and see more of her amazing work, for Tyler, her Facebook and Twitter are Roaring Softly. And on Instagram, it's Tyler Fetter. So now that that's out of the way, I want to go to my next question for you, Tyler, which is this feeling of isolation. There was one illustration that I want to show everyone from your book. And again, I'm sharing all of these with your permission and your book publisher's permission. So I'm so glad to have this opportunity to do this. And I think this illustration really, to me, is so evocative. You have all this noise, all this chatter going around you.
Mm-hmm.
And yet, look how you represented how you were feeling. And you were a young adult. You were in college, let alone how a younger child might be feeling who may be in elementary school or middle school or even high school.
Mm-hmm.
Help us understand this feeling of isolation and your art of this particular piece.
Sure. So my mom was diagnosed with cancer over summer break, and she had stage 4 cancer. So we went straight into the worst part. There was no ramping up. And I had a small group of friends in my dorm, but I wasn't best pals with everyone. And I'm pretty quiet and introverted and not staying in touch with everyone a ton over the summer. So I got back to school in the fall and everyone's like, "How was your summer?" And I didn't know what to do. I did not feel comfortable turning the conversation into this dark thing, especially with people that I didn't know well. I mean, it's common to get back to school and everyone says, "How was your summer?" It's kind of just a small talk question. So I did a lot of plastering smile on my face and being like, "Oh, I was in Florida. It was really hot and I'm glad to be back." And I was just kind of shriveling inside. And it did feel really isolating. I didn't really have people that I could just let my guard down around, even my close friends.
I wonder if you would agree that carrying around that secondary, the first word that comes to my mind is not the right word. I want to say secondary personality, but that secondary forward facing Tyler,
Mhm.
is that another burden that comes with grief? Because that sounds familiar and it also
Yeah.
sounds exhausting.
Yeah, definitely exhausting. I think it's like another persona. I didn't want to be like Debbie Downer and just like, I'm in college and people are partying and like being so excited about being on their own. And I'm not going to go around like just making everyone sad. And also, I didn't love having a lot of attention on myself. So,
Vicki,
it's just exhausting trying to be smiley and pretend that everything's okay when like every phone call I got, I would like think I was gonna hear the worst news.
Vicki, how does that show up? And I'm going to show this as well. This particular illustration, then I'll pivot to Vicki for your comments. This is another way of kind of expressing the same feeling, which is like what you want to say
Mhm.
versus what you do say. I'm going to leave this illustration up a little bit longer because there's a lot of text to read. But maybe, Vicki, I can pivot to you now and you could start helping us understand the weight of having, as Tyler just said, these personas, and how that complicates or at least challenges our grief experience.
Thank you, Allison. Both of these pieces of art that are, from the heart, art from the heart, really and truly are a reminder of what I just said. I hope it reminds people to not always just ask the positive questions, but to give room and space for the negative questions. Because nobody really opened the door for Tyler on, she didn't have an opportunity to say something that was less than wonderful in her peer group. And peer groups are so important. We can tell in this call, people are saying, me too, I did, I agree. And here we are, grown adults who are still seeking others who understand where we are. The other thing I would say is we know that it is inevitable that you're going to be put in situations where people ask questions about how you are and what happened and how you're feeling and making assumptions that your world looks like their world. And so one of the gifts we can give to kids and to each other, to our friends and family, is to prepare for those. So when they ask you how your summer is, Tyler, what are you going to say? And let's work out a script together so that you're prepared for it. And you have a response that doesn't have to match the feel good that may have come from the others, but doesn't necessarily have to just allow you to, share your whole story and all the downs, but something that you can kind of compose ahead of time in your head and your heart, recite it, write it, practice it, whatever feels good. With kids, we encourage them to practice with the people that are safe to them, and so that they can feel confident when they walk into that situation that unfortunately, you were put in. It happens all the time, Allison. You said, where does this show up? It shows up all the time because we make assumptions that everybody is experiencing the same things we are. I would even add to that even if I'd had a loss, I would assume that Tyler's loss looked like my loss, that my heart felt like her heart. And we know that's just not true. And so giving room for that too, and then helping people understand loss looks different on everybody, and for you to ask them permission to let you be whoever you are during this time and period that follows the loss.
I would like to take a highlighter to one point that I feel that deserves amplification, which is that you're talking about doing something proactively before it can strike a child or a young adult. We know these conversations will happen. You're talking about being ready with that script, which I think is so smart. That takes a level of proactivity. So to talk about these issues head on, perhaps before they even arise, and that we shouldn't be fearful of talking about something before it shows up as a problem. Is that what you're talking about, Vicki?
Absolutely. There's some things that are consistent, and that is one of the things that's consistent. So as people who are put in the role of supporting others, we need to learn to reach out and help them be proactive. For those that have had the loss themselves and they are fearful of what lies ahead, having the confidence in us just giving permission to each other to reach out and say, I'm really nervous about going back, after the summer, because I know that my world looks different. What am I going to do? And having that self-talk, reaching out to people that are our support systems.
If you're just joining us now, I am so thrilled that you are here. I know we've been admitting people during this conversation. We're talking with Tyler Fetter, who is the author of this great new book called Dancing at the Pity Party, or My Pity Party? The Pity Party. Okay, thank you. And then Vicki J, who is the CEO of the National Alliance for Grieving Children. And I'm so happy that you guys are here. We're going to be getting to your questions in just a moment. So if you have been taking notes or just listening, as a reminder, we are going to go to the chat and start taking your questions soon. So think about what you would want to ask Tyler. Her Instagram following is through the roof, and now you have her all to yourself to ask her your questions. Vicki J runs the National Alliance for Grieving Children. It is a membership network. If you need support, if you're looking for support for the children who you love, you can find those resources on the NAGC website. And one piece of support that I want to call out right now, we've been talking about isolation, preparing children for having those conversations when they go into a new experience, and kids will say to them, how are you doing? What are you up to? Where are you going? And the isolation when maybe you don't feel comfortable sharing what's really going on. We've talked about that feeling of difference. And there's one resource that Vicki J that you've put together that I want to make sure we just give a shout out to, which is that the National Alliance for Grieving Children has summer camps, not that NAGC runs, but your membership organizations run summer camps just for grieving children. And so going into the summer, that's a place where I'm sure honesty can happen, right? Where the mask can come off. Can you tell us about summer and grieving camps and where we can find that listing?
Thank you, Allison. So many of our members are program providers, and they offer year-round programs, sometimes centered around the school year. But as Allison said, many of them offer summer camp programs. I think Deirdre just put in the chat the link to the list of summer camps. They're across the country, and they range in length and all kinds of things. Most of our camps, most of all the programs are of no charge to the participants. So really the challenge is to get the people who need the services connected to the services, and you can be that connection. I appreciate Allison, helping everyone understand what's out there. I would also say on the website, you just mentioned, Allison, hard conversations and hard topics, and there's some free downloadable resources on our website on how to talk about death and how to talk about funerals and just how to really have open, honest conversations about very difficult situations, which is very much what Reimagine wants to do. They want to put a spark in all of us to have hard conversations to add meaning to our life.
And if you do need more support, then perhaps this event can provide. There's also counseling of many stripes. There are support groups of many varieties, often for adults in mind, for the caregivers, but of course for children as well. Damani for Grief, we spoke about Damani for Grief. There are, of course, our sponsors. So I would be not doing my work if I didn't mention that Damani for Grief has amazing support programs that are available. So please check out the Damani for Grief website as well. I do want to get to your questions, but the last illustration of Tyler that I want to show is really, I think, stirring, and I think also very hopeful. And Tyler, I'm not going to describe this. I want you to describe it and tell us the meaning.
Sure. So before my mom's funeral, we had a meeting with our rabbi who was going to be like leading the funeral, and we all gathered with him with our family and talked about my mom and what he would mention in his speeches and stuff. And a big theme with my mom is that she died really young, and how to process that. So the thing he brought up is that when you look at someone's headstone or the where it says like in parentheses their birth date and death date wherever they're mentioned, and it has the dash between the birth date and the death date, the dash is the most important part of that because that represents the person's whole life and everything that they did with their life. And so that's what we should be focusing on rather than the short distance between the birth and death. And that was a big comfort to me.
The dash. I'm going to forever say the dash.
Yeah.
I love it. I really, really love it. Vicki, does that come up maybe in not that way and maybe not using that word, but is that somehow useful for children, or is that too much of a, an amorphous kind of nebulous idea that maybe is not helpful for kids?
There's a poem called The Dash that's been around for years and years. And I think it resonates usually with adults, obviously. Kids don't have this time-endedness to their world. They just they don't think about the moment and making the most of life right now for themselves personally. But when they're dealing with the loss of someone that they loved or someone who was a part of their life, it is very therapeutic and helpful for us to help them talk about the person who lived and how they lived and what values that they passed on to us. And, what did you learn from their life and what did you enjoy? And just like Tyler has showed us that humor is a wonderful tool to have this conversation, helping kids find joy and humor in the lives of the people that have passed, have died in their life, is invaluable. There's no way to. Sometimes we concentrate on tell me how she died, what happened, when, where were you, the facts of life. And really, if we could just back that up a little bit and say, tell me about your mom. I didn't know her. Can you teach me about her? Can you share her with me? I'd love to know more about your mom. That is very therapeutic for our kids.
I love that. I have spent so much time talking about the art, the science, the fun, the creativity that can be brought to keeping the memories of our loved ones alive. You are speaking to my heart, Vicki J. So thank you so much for talking about what we can do to honor and celebrate our loved ones. And Tyler, you've now created a book that honors and celebrates your mom, and we all now know about her and all of her quirks, because you don't mince words, right? So some of it is really just light and lovely, and I do now know your mom so much more than I could have otherwise. So what a gift that you have done to really cherish that bond that you still have.
It's a gift to me that more people know about her now. It's been really helpful to my grieving process.
Allison, so many times people have book clubs where you get the book of the month and you gather and you read it separately and then you discuss it together. I cannot imagine a better book to have in a book club discussion, because it just puts the topic on the table and gives everybody an opportunity to talk about life and death in a real way, in a real connectedness to each other.
I love that. Tyler, you heard it here first. Your book should be a book club pick everywhere.
I love that.
Okay. That's awesome. Okay. I'm going to pivot now. Christina, you are on. You've been monitoring the chat for some questions. And so we have nearly 19 minutes left, and I want to use it. 16 minutes. I can't count really well. So Christina, you're on.
Great. We have a question from Sarah. It says, how do you hold space for your losses and honor them when your family doesn't talk about that or controls the conversations on the topics they want?
But it's such a hard thing. I've been mostly lucky on that front, and that my family really does a lot of talking openly about it. But still, as time passes, there's less of that. I think a big thing is that if you want to talk about your loved one, then you can bring it up. And if other people are uncomfortable, they can be uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable to lose someone that you love. I think if that's too hard, you can do some like nonverbal stuff. I really love cooking food that my mom liked. These earrings I'm wearing were my mom's. I wear her perfume. Like I listen to music she liked. I play games she liked. Like you can involve that stuff. So like if your family doesn't love talking about your mom, but your mom loved to play Monopoly or something, maybe you could just play Monopoly with your family, and that'll like kind of bring her to the situation, even if she's not there.
I love the non-verbal idea. I want to add my own idea. I
Mhm.
have 2 young adults, both in college, and I find that you can also communicate. They both didn't know my parents because they were both either not yet born or too young to remember my mom and dad. And so if I post pictures about my parents on social media, I'm sharing memories about my parents, their grandparents, without ever having to talk to them eye to eye. They just see it in their feed. They can absorb it on their own timetable and then understand more about their grandparents because they're not even under my roof most of the year now because they're in college. So Tyler, your idea of non-verbal opportunity is a very good one.
Thank you.
Absolutely. I would say 2 things. Number one, you need to do what you need to do for you. And many times others are looking for a leader, somebody to break the ice and just help them, give them permission to share or not share, to participate or not participate, whatever. But, by stating, but this is what I need, this is what is important to me, or I chose this dress because, these earrings because, helps them more than you realize, just because they're not feeding you back kind of the recognition we need. The other thing is all kinds of nonverbal ways. I love that, Tyler. The Christmas tree with the ornaments and sharing memories and writing messages of, memories or whatever, finding a whiteboard in the house that everybody just scribbles things on, just things that can be done in passing. What is usually uncomfortable is the big sit down, tell all, talk all about it, the serious. So the more you can weave it in and out in a natural environment and less in the big powwow kind of discussion, the better I think things go.
Christina, is there another good question that you want to bring up?
Yes. This one is from Mary. Can you talk about the difference between questions that are helpful and supportive and those that are intrusive?
Yeah, I think in general, just asking questions is great. I think the thing that can feel intrusive is like looking for a specific answer or a specific tone. Sometimes I would tell friends or other family like a funny story about my mom, and they would look like sad in their face. It was like the only thing that they were taking out of the funny story was her mom is dead. And I know like talking about death is just awkward. It's just a thing that's awkward. But like when I was in college, if anyone had asked me to tell them about my mom, I would have loved doing that. Or asked like, not like how are you doing, but like how are things going with your mom, and not looking for me to say something that kind of puts a button on it, but like things are hard right now, her numbers are going down and it's hard, and to be able to have that like straightforward conversation without trying to candy coat anything, I guess.
I guess the ignoring of an issue is another open wound, right? When
Yeah.
you don't address it head on, it doesn't not exist. It
Mhm.
still exists, and you're now ignoring it.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Right.
Absolutely.
Christina.
Sure. I got a private question about from a grandmother who's caring for her granddaughter, and her granddaughter wants to play video games to forget her sad. So does anyone have advice on how to deal with that feeling?
I mean, I play video games to calm down and not be sad all the time. I don't think there's necessarily anything wrong with that. I think like some numbing is fine. If it's like overtaking her whole understanding of the grief, then maybe that's something to be concerned about. But I just feel like everyone handles grief differently, and they handle it differently at different times. So like she might be really into video games now, and in a few years she'll be into journaling or writing music or whatever.
Vicki, how would you know if that was not an appropriate way of dealing with grief?
Well, what I would say is, it is fine. It is a tool. It is a coping mechanism, but there's not a single coping mechanism that handles it all. So it's okay for her to play video games. It needs to be monitored as the length and the type of games and all those things that would play into that. But in addition to that, there needs to be some other follow-up. So let's talk about SAD. And tell me about SAD, and give the child opportunities to explain, define, share SAD. She may or may not participate the first time, the third time, the 99th time, but she needs to know that she has that option or that opportunity. The most important, or not the most, a mistake that is often made is that we say, don't be sad. And we can't take away our feelings from those kids. We have to let them be in their feelings. And so even asking, so how does that make you feel better? Tell me about it, and try to get the child to bring you into their world of video games. But any coping mechanism can be definitely overused and problematic for sure.
There's one more illustration that I don't think we got to use. Christina, can we show everyone the dorm room illustration? I want to show this last one because I feel like it's really evocative. So even for the youngest kids, this was an illustration that Tyler, you have in your book that I really love. And it describes that really headwind, that jarring feeling of going back to a physical location in terms of your story, your dorm room. And
Mhm.
everything was just kind of the way you left it. But of course, everything was different. And I
Yeah.
imagine this could play out for the youngest children who are going back to school. The classroom may look exactly the same, or maybe the camp looks exactly the same, but you are profoundly different. And I'm wondering, in the last few moments that we have together today, describe this for you. And I just noticed every time, Tyler, I look at one of your drawings, I see something new. And now I just noticed the N on the book for Northwestern, where you went to college. So I love it. Every time I look at, something always pops out that just grabs me. But anyway, Tyler, tell me about this feeling of walking into your completely different, but the physical space is the same.
Yeah, I think I would almost describe it as culture shock, even though it's like a place I spent like most of my time, like prior to my mom dying. But the
Culture
whole,
shock.
yeah, like the whole process of like being at the hospital or wherever you are when your loved one dies, but it's such a surreal, just like wacky experience. It feels like you're living a movie or something. And then when you go back to your home or wherever you were before, and it's just quiet and looks how you remember it, it's just really jarring. And yeah, it was its own thing I had to deal with and kind of find a new normal.
Vicki J, is there a way to ease that experience? That's not just for college students, right? So kids would re-enter a physical space that's familiar, but then altogether different with their new grief exposure. So I'm wondering, how would you tackle that kind of feeling for the youngest of children, and of course for middle school and high school aged children?
So for the youngest of kids, they don't necessarily process at that level. They are living in the space as the space is now. They are tangible, so they like tangibility. They like to touch and remember and feel and see things that are a part of their life, and that's really important. So when they go back home, we have a lot of kids that talk about, things have changed at home. Do you want little brother's room to always stay the same? And that is a great way for families to have good conversations about loss and change. And what do we want to hold on to the same? And what do we want to change? And what do we want to create new and different? Maybe we want to take pieces and parts of this life and somehow put it in some memorabilia or some tangible thing. The little kids really enjoy being a part of that. For the most part, the youngest kids really don't have a timeline. Everything that happened yesterday or happened in the past happened yesterday, and everything that's going to happen in the future is going to happen tomorrow. And so that they don't really see the same kind of timeline and processing in that way that we do. A little bit older kids obviously do. And it's again, that preparation. Now, when you go back into school, when you go back into your room, when you go back to church, whatever it is, help them know what they'll see, what they'll, remember, the thoughts, that will come up. And then we always think if we've prepared them, we've done our job. But the real work comes in the processing afterwards and the debriefing and once they've had that experience to help them know what to do with those emotions that they've had.
Thank you so much, Vicki. I want to take maybe one more question, Christina, before we do. If anyone has to jump off early, again, that's okay. We're being recorded. You can watch this later. There is support out there within the National Alliance for Grieving Children community. Vicki J, if we're watching this from all over the country, I saw so many people from coast to coast and in the middle of our nation. Where can they find a place to trust? I know there's a directory on the NAGC website. Can you just tell people where they can go to find the support that they need?
Absolutely. So the NAGC is a network of people across the United States who want to support children who've had a loss. And so if you go on our website, which is Children Grieve, and Deirdre will put up the direct link to the resource page, I think she just did, click on your state and then click on the links that are close to you, geographically. One thing I would add though this year, Allison, is this year there really aren't any geographical boundaries. So just because there's not something in your community doesn't mean that there's not services available, because of the magic of Zoom and this virtual world that we're living in now. I would also say for those of you on the call that aren't a member of NAGC or find yourself in the role of supporting children through your profession or volunteer work, we have a national symposium every year where we convene experts and we learn from each other and explore best practices in supporting grieving children. And that this year will be a virtual symposium. So that means it's open to everybody, UK and Canada and everywhere in between that we can think of. And so you could go to our website and click on the symposium link. The only caveat to that, Allison, is that the registration closes on Monday, the 31st, at the end of this month. So thank you.
All right, so hop to it. Also, I just saw in the chat, Liz asked, but how about supporting the adults? Well, we are here because of Domani for Grief. So I would say check out the Domani for Grief community page on Facebook, which is at Domani for Grief. I would say on Instagram, you can follow Domani for Grief on Instagram. Of course, you know about Reimagine because they have helped us be here as your host. And you can follow Let's Reimagine on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. And so there are plenty of resources out there. Just be proactive and go search for them. Domani for Grief is a great place, and there are support groups that are new, and new ones will be added all the time, and you can find that support, Liz, for the adults. And Christina, we have 3 minutes left. I am good with time. Is there a hyper round of questions that you can ask Tyler and Vicki with quick answers that we can give folks in the few minutes remaining?
It's a big question for Vicki, and it's about teenagers. Judy has a stereotypical teenage boy who doesn't want to talk about his feelings with his mom about losing his brother. And how should his mother help him process, but also honor his request to stay private?
You know, teens are such unique beings. That's a challenge that we all have. The first thing he needs to know is that he is loved and it is safe regardless, and that you're there for him whether he talks or doesn't talk. It doesn't matter. Help him just by sometimes feeding to him. I know you have a lot of feelings. I know you don't want to talk about it, just acknowledging that ahead of time, but I'm here. You know, and I know that, you know, maybe activity is good for you. So, you know, helping find sports or arts or whatever it is that kind of feeds his soul, that he has an outlet for those feelings. I used to be able to tell when my daughter broke up with someone because she would get on that piano and play the slowest, most sad note you've ever heard. But I could tell when she was mad and girls had done her ugly because she'd get on the basketball court and beat the heck out of the, you know, ball. And that's how we really can learn about where our kids are, our teens are emotionally, is by watching their behaviors and their activities.
And this conversation does not have to end in the 2 minutes we have left. Tyler, I know you are on social media. Tell us, of course, the name of your book, where we can get it, how everyone on this call can continue to be inspired by you and feel connected to you. How can we continue that conversation?
Sure. Well, my book is Dancing at the Pity Party. It's available, I want to say wherever books are sold, probably not everywhere books are sold, but most of the normal places. And you can find me on Instagram. I'm at Tyler Fetter. I post a lot of mental healthy, griefy things, but it's not always deep stuff like that. And I read all my DMs, I read all my emails. Even if I don't respond to you, I've still read it and probably felt a strong emotional thing. So if you need to dump something out and just know that someone who probably has something in common with you has read it, I am happy to do that. And
Tyler, thank you so much. Vicki J, thank you so much. Christina, as always, you did a bang up job as moderator of our discussion today, and today showing Tyler's beautiful work. We're done. We're out of time. Please watch this video again if you've missed any part of it, if you had to walk away. Join us in June. Again, the last Thursday of every month, we will have another conversation in the past and present series. Thank you to Domani for Grief. Thank you to Reimagine. And I hope everyone has an awesome day. Thank you again, everybody.